Hey guys, welcome to my channel. So this is video number 2 in Azure Analysis Services tutorial video or series. So in this video, we are going to talk about the architecture of Azure Analysis Service. But before that, let's do a quick recap of what we covered in video number 1. In video number 1, we took three main takeaways. One is we understood that Azure Analysis Service came out of SQL Server Analysis Service, which is like an on-prem version of Azure Analysis Service. Uh, the idea was since everything is moving into cloud, we need to have, or Microsoft rather, need to have equivalent service that was similar to Azure Analysis Service. That's why we had, Azure Analysis Service, equivalent service to SQL Server Analysis Services. So that's why we have Azure Analysis Service. The second takeaway is that in SQL Server Analysis Service, you had two different models. One is tabular model. The second one is the multi-dimensional model. In Azure Analysis Service, you only have tabular model. They have taken out the multi-dimensional model because of its complexity. It's not that user intuitive. You have something called cubes, which doesn't go well with how you view the data, especially if you're coming from a database world. So you normally see rows and columns. So that's why they have only kept tabular model. And the third takeaway is that there are two ways where you can write your query, and these are two different methodologies. One is MDX, which stands for multidimensional DAX expressions, and the other one is DAX. So multidimensional expressions, as the name suggests, is usually applicable to multidimensional models. So if you have the multidimensional model, if you want to use MDX, you can do that. The DAX refers to or is mostly used in case of tabular models where you have the concept of rows and columns. You can also use MDX when you try to fetch data from DAX structures, especially Azure Analysis Service models. But I think the reverse might not be true. If you have multidimensional cubes and if you want to use DAX, you might not be able to do that, although I'm not 100% sure on that. So yeah, so these are the things that we covered. In this video, we're mostly going to talk about the architecture of Azure Analysis Service, and we'll discuss some tools that could be handy. If you're learning Azure Analysis Service for the first time, that could be handy to develop your things or maybe fine tune the already developed things or for for your day-to-day activities. So let's jump into it. So now, let's look at the architecture of Azure Analysis Service. But before we do that, I think let's spend maybe a couple of minutes try to understand why we need an Azure Analysis Service. Maybe this could be a recap from video one. So one is that you need a whenever you need a semantic layer, a common layer. I think one of the synonyms that you can use for semantic is common. If you talk about layman terms. Why common? Because you will have multiple teams working in an organization, and you would not want to, develop your own tables, and you don't want to work in silos. So you might want to leverage the work that is already being done in by one of the teams, and that's why you have semantic term being used or common term being used. So whenever you want to build a common, model, that's where you can use Azure Analysis Services. And also, not only that, one of the other scenarios where you would want to use Azure Analysis Service would be when you have, memory limitations, especially if you're using a Power BI report on the front end and you don't have enough room to store your data, or you might don't have enough compute to run the DAX calculations. So that's why you might be able to go for, or you might want to go for Azure Analysis Service. But as I pointed out in my video number one, if that is the scenario, you should opt to use, Azure, sorry, Power BI premium services, or maybe for that matter, you can go with Microsoft Fabric, which is an upcoming technology or tool that is provided by Microsoft. So yeah, so that is the main motivation. That is, if you want to store high amount of data, then you can go for Azure Analysis Service. And that is evident from this Azure Analysis Service Microsoft website. Here you can see different, you know, pricing tiers. You have developed tier, you have basic tier, and then standard tier. So especially if you're working in organizations, you might be using any of these tiers. And these tiers have two main parameters. One is QPUs, which represents your computing power, and then the memory, which represents the data that you can save. So higher the instance, higher the tier, the more expensive it is, and more QPUs and memory you would get with that. So that is the main reason behind using Azure Analysis Service. And you can probably try to visualize this figure. So you have this semantic layer in between. Then you have ad hoc data analysis. So mostly Power BI tool is used for this data analysis or data you know, reporting. And then you have different data sources. Now let's look at the architecture here. So some other new terms will be thrown around here, and we will look into it. So if you look at it, look at the architecture. All of this architecture represents how this works in the context of Azure, sorry, analysis services, which might be your SQL Server analysis services. But more or less, it would be the same if you have to if you want to study the architecture with respect to Azure analysis service. So you have data source, and then you have two different engines. One is the formula engine, the second one is the storage engine, and then you have analysis service, and then you have the queries. So when you write a query, so mostly it would be MDX and DAX as we studied. That would go into the formula engine, and then based on what mode are you selecting. So this is I mean, you can draw parallels when you work. If you try to compare it with Power BI, in Power BI also you have either an option of importing the data, or you can go with direct query. So similar to that, you have these two ways to query the data. So if you're using a direct query, a simple SQL-like query would be passed to your data source, and the data will be fetched. If you are using import mode in here, you can call it as vertipack. uh, and the data will be cached. It will be stored in memory in Azure Analysis Service database, and you would want to have periodic refresh because it will not have the up-to-date data. You will have to force the refresh if you want to get the latest data. So this is important. So Vertipack is the new term that you might have encountered here. So whenever we say Vertipack within Azure Analysis Services context, it refers to the fact that the data is stored in memory, the data is compressed, and it is stored columnar wise as compared to row wise. Why do we do that? Because this is specially designed for large amounts of data. So if you have data lesser than 1 GB or in MBs, this might not be the right architecture, or you might not want to use a Azure Analysis Service in that case. This could only be used when you have huge data sets, mainly from 1 GB to 10 GB, or maybe more than that, or maybe higher than that. So two important things here: the data is compressed and data is stored columnar wise, which means the entire which means how the engine tries to retrieve the data is through columns, not your normal row wise operations, so which makes it a little I would say faster as compared to the traditional row wise operations. So it's similar to how we store the data in columnar database. So that's why uh, the similarities are drawn. And there could be different ways or algorithms in which you can store this data. You can store this data with the help of, I think, hash coding. What it means is whatever your data values are, it will, produce a hash value based on that. And those hash values will then be stored inside the memory. So it's a kind of a structure on how you want to save the data, and there are other ways to save the data as well. I'm not able to recall the name. Maybe one of the algorithm is RLE, but that's like a advanced concept, so we might not want to go into it. So yeah, so this is what it looks like architecture wise. Now in the upcoming section, we might want to study three important terms or tools on this SSMS. So if you want to connect to your Azure Analysis Service database, you most likely would be using SQL Server Management Studio. There are two other non-Microsoft tools which are Tabular Editor and then DAX Studio. Second and third are mostly used. A third is specifically used for fine-tuning your DAX queries, and the second one is used to maybe make changes to your semantic model. It gives more information about how the semantic model looks like, what are the different tables inside it, and what happens underneath it. So here you go. So this is how this looks like when you use direct query. The queries go directly to the underlying database. It would give you up-to-date data, but it might not have greatest performance, and the amount of data would also be limited because here in Vertipack you can leverage the in-memory capabilities, the in-memory you know uh, uh, data storage cap. So that might be as high as 400 GB based on which service tier you're using. But here you might not be able to store that much of data because you don't have that much of memory. You would have the in-memory as much as is provided by the Power BI workspace if you're using Power BI in the front end. So hope this helps. We will try to make video number 3 if I can find a good, or if I could simulate a good um, performance tuning scenario. If not, maybe we'll limit to this. Maybe I'll write some article based on that. So thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, you can list down in the comments box below. Thank you.